Let me tell you what is happening right now. Not what the Western press is telling you is happening, but what is actually happening. And I want to start with a sentence that I think captures everything that follows. Iran is not scrambling, Iran is sequencing. That distinction matters more than any single military event, any ship seizure, any truth social post, any prediction market movement. A country that is scrambling responds to events reactively, without a coherent strategy, producing inconsistent messages because it is genuinely confused about what it wants. A country that is sequencing produces actions that look reactive from the outside, but follow a deliberate internal logic, each step building on the previous one, each audience receiving what it needs to hear, each channel loaded in the order that produces the maximum diplomatic leverage at the moment of decision. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is in Moscow today.
He flew there from Muscat, where he met Oman's Sultan Haytham bin Tariq yesterday. He flew to Muscat from Islamabad, where he spent Friday meeting senior Pakistani officials. He will fly back to Islamabad on Sunday for a second visit, and he will return to Tehran carrying the full picture of where every major party stands: Pakistan, Oman, Russia, before any formal negotiating session with America resumes. The Western coverage is treating this as confusion. The talks in Islamabad collapsed. Trump canceled Witkoff's trip. Iran left without meeting the Americans. And now Iran's foreign minister is flying around the region in what the press is calling a diplomatic scramble. Let me tell you what it actually is. It is the most disciplined diplomatic offensive Iran has run in 62 days of war, and Moscow is the most important stop on the tour. Not because Russia is the most powerful party, not because Russia has the largest role in any eventual deal, but because Russia holds the specific card that the entire negotiation's technical resolution depends on, the uranium custodianship offer, and because Russia and China need to compare notes before Trump arrives in Beijing in 3 weeks. And Araghchi is the person who can ensure those notes are current, accurate, and favorable to the outcome Iran needs. Let me explain each element of that precisely. Let me start with what happened in Islamabad, because I think it has been reported accurately but analyzed completely backwards. Araghchi flew to Pakistan on Friday. He met senior Pakistani officials. He shared, in his own words, Iran's position concerning a workable framework to permanently end the war on Iran. He called the visit very fruitful, and then he left without meeting the Americans. The Western press called this a failure. Trump canceled Witkoff's trip and posted that Iran's leadership was too fractured to deal with. American officials described frustration at Iran's unwillingness to sit across the table. Here is what was actually happening. Araghchi's visit to Islamabad was never designed to produce a meeting with American officials. Iran's state news agency, IRNA, said explicitly before the visit that it was bilateral in nature, to speak with Pakistani officials rather than for talks right away with the US. This was not a secret. Iran announced the purpose of the visit in advance. America announced a meeting that Iran had never agreed to, waited for Iran to not show up, and then characterized Iran's absence as the reason talks collapsed. What Araghchi actually did in Islamabad was load the channel. He gave Pakistan Iran's complete negotiating position, the workable framework. Pakistan is now the carrier of that position to America. Whether America engages with what Pakistan now holds is America's choice. But the terms are in the channel. Iran has done its part of the public diplomacy. Then Araghchi flew to Muscat and met Oman's Sultan Haytham, confirmed with photo, published. The Oman channel, the private back channel through which every significant Iran-America agreement has been constructed since 2013, is now loaded with Iran's improved offer. The offer that Trump himself described as much better and confirmed arrived within 10 minutes of his cancellation of the Pakistan trip. 10 minutes, the offer was ready. Iran was not scrambling, Iran was waiting, and now Araghchi is in Moscow, and this is where I want to spend the most time, because Moscow is not a side trip. Moscow is the strategic center of this entire diplomatic sequence. Why does Iran brief Russia before returning to Pakistan? There are three reasons, and each one is specific. The first reason is the uranium. Russia made a public offer, confirmed by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, to store Iran's enriched uranium as part of a peace framework. This offer remains on the table. Trump rejected it. Not because it was technically unworkable, storing enriched uranium at existing Russian nuclear facilities is operationally straightforward, and the IAEA has verification protocols for exactly this kind of custodianship arrangement. Trump rejected it because he did not want Russia to gain leverage in the global nuclear energy sector that custodianship of Iranian material would provide. That rejection did not make the offer disappear, it made the offer more valuable. Because here is the technical reality that no amount of Truth Social posts can change. Any deal that ends this conflict requires Iran's enriched uranium to go somewhere. America has said Iran cannot keep it. Iran will not give it to America or accept American controlled destruction. Russia's offer is the only currently available mechanism that Iran can accept domestically. The material stays in Allied hands outside American jurisdiction, while America could potentially accept strategically. The material leaves Iranian soil and Iranian direct control. When Trump rejected the Russian offer, he eliminated his own most available solution to the most technically difficult problem of any Iran deal. And now Araghchi is in Moscow to ensure that the Russian offer stays alive, stays current, and stays available as the fallback mechanism when America eventually realizes it needs it. This is not hope, this is geometry. The uranium has to go somewhere. There is one offer on the table for where it can go. That offer is Russian. Araghchi is in Moscow to make sure it does not expire while Trump is posting about cards. The second reason is energy coordination. Russia and Iran are running a joint energy operation during this war. Russia is collecting approximately $700 million per day in additional oil revenue from elevated Brent crude prices because Hormuz being contested means oil stays above $100, and $100 oil means Russian exports at Russian shadow fleet prices generate revenues far above what Western sanctions intended to cap. Iran is exporting more oil in the months of this war than it did before the war began, because China's shadow fleet, CIPS payment system, and strategic reserves have kept the Iranian oil economy functioning despite the American blockade. These two parallel operations, Russia's elevated revenue from energy markets and Iran's continued exports through Chinese infrastructure, require coordination. The shadow fleet routes, the CIPS payment protocols, the pricing arrangements with Chinese state refineries, the passage through Hormuz that Iran grants to Russian affiliated vessels, all of this operates as a system that requires periodic face to face diplomatic alignment. You cannot run a joint energy operation of this complexity on automated protocols alone. Ministers need to talk. Araghchi's Moscow visit is in part an operational coordination meeting dressed in diplomatic language. The third reason is the Beijing summit. Trump is flying to Xi Jinping in May, in approximately 3 weeks. The Beijing summit is where the diplomatic arc of this conflict will be resolved. Everyone in this story knows this. Iran knows it. Russia knows it. China knows it. The countries that matter most to the outcome, China and Russia, need to arrive at the Beijing summit with aligned positions. They need to know what Iran's actual terms are. They need to know what America's actual private responses have been through the Oman Channel. And they need to compare notes before Trump arrives. Araghchi briefing Russia in Moscow ensures that Russia and China can compare notes in the 10 days between his Moscow visit and Trump's arrival in Beijing. When Trump sits across from Xi will know what Araghchi told Putin. Russia and China will have synchronized their assessments of what Iran's terms are and what it would take to bridge the gap to American requirements. America arrives at the summit having been the last to know, through the Oman Channel, what Iran offered. Russia and China arrive having been directly briefed. That is not Iran's weakness, that is Iran's strategy. Now, let me address something I hear repeatedly in Western analysis and that I think is fundamentally wrong. The analysis says Iran is fractured. The IRGC and the diplomatic team are contradicting each other. Araghchi flies to Islamabad. The IRGC seizes ships. The foreign minister says the strait is open. the IRGC closes it. This is a government in chaos, unable to coordinate its own message, unable to present a coherent negotiating position. I want to challenge this analysis directly. And I want to be precise because this is the misunderstanding that has driven every failed prediction about Iranian behavior in this conflict. The IRGC and Iran's diplomatic apparatus are not two halves of a fractured government pulling in opposite directions by accident. They are two instruments of Iranian statecraft playing two roles simultaneously in a coordinated performance. The IRGC applies military and maritime pressure that raises the cost of continued conflict for America and for global energy markets. The diplomatic apparatus presents Iran's reasonable terms and its willingness to negotiate. Both roles require the other to function effectively. The IRGC's pressure is what makes the diplomatic track worth taking seriously. Without the IRGC seizing ships, laying mines, and maintaining operational control of the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's diplomatic terms would be negotiated from a position of pure weakness, the terms of a country that has been bombed into submission and is asking for mercy. With the IRGC maintaining pressure, Iran's diplomatic terms are negotiated from a position of demonstrated resistance, the terms of a country that has survived 62 days of the most intensive American bombing campaign since the Gulf War and is still choosing to offer a workable framework rather than escalate to maximum retaliation. The diplomatic track is what makes the IRGC's pressure not simply destructive, it gives the pressure a defined endpoint that could be removed by meeting Iran's stated conditions. If Iran only had the IRGC and no diplomatic track, the conflict would have no exit except military defeat or exhaustion. If Iran only had the diplomatic track and no IRGC pressure, the negotiating position would be too weak to produce terms Iran's domestic audience could accept. What looks like contradiction from the outside, IRGC seizing ships on the same day the foreign minister says the strait is open, is actually a dual channel strategy aimed at two different audiences simultaneously. To the international community, to the countries watching from Europe, India, the Gulf states, China, Russia, Iran's diplomatic message is we are willing to negotiate, we have stated terms, we are ready when America is. To America specifically, Iran's military message through the IRGC is the cost of not negotiating is rising every day you wait. Both messages need to reach their respective audiences simultaneously for the strategy to function. I have heard Western analysts describe this as mixed signals. It is not mixed signals. It is two different signals directed at two different audiences for two different purposes. The audiences are not confused. The Gulf states know exactly what Iran's diplomatic terms are. Araghchi has stated them publicly. America knows exactly what the IRGC's operational posture is. CENTCOM reports it daily. The only party that seems confused by the dual channel approach is the American press, which keeps asking why Iran's message is inconsistent, when Iran has never claimed its military and diplomatic tracks, are saying the same thing to the same audience. This is how states have conducted negotiations under duress for centuries. The party that combines military pressure with diplomatic openness while keeping its terms consistent forces the other side to choose between negotiating and absorbing increasing costs. America has been absorbing increasing costs. $100 oil, American Airlines cutting profit forecasts, agricultural exports disrupted through Hormuz, allied relationships strained over a blockade that European partners declined to join, 19 warships committed to a theater with no clear exit without achieving the primary objective of forcing Iran to the table on American terms. After 62 days, the strategy has not worked. And Araghchi is in Moscow coordinating with Russia while Trump is in Washington posting about cards. Araghchi flying to Moscow is not evidence of confusion. It is evidence that Iran has a clear strategy, has been executing it with discipline for 62 days, and is now entering the phase where the diplomatic outcome is being pre-negotiated with the parties who will be present at the Beijing summit. Let me now explain what Russia gets from Araghchi's visit, because I think this dimension of the Moscow trip is underanalyzed and it matters for understanding what comes out of the Beijing summit. Russia gets three things from being the country that receives Iran's full briefing before the formal negotiating track resumes. And I want to be specific about each because the Western analysis consistently underestimates Russia's role in this conflict. First, Russia gets real time intelligence on the state of the negotiations from Iran's perspective, not filtered through Pakistani intermediaries who have their own diplomatic interests, not interpreted through Omani diplomatic language designed to keep both parties comfortable. Direct from Iran's foreign minister to Russia's foreign ministry with the full texture of what Iran offered in its much better proposal, what America said through the Oman Channel in response, where the specific technical gaps remain on the nuclear disposal question, and what Iran's actual red lines are versus its publicly stated positions. This intelligence is more valuable to Russia than anything it can obtain through open source reporting or intelligence collection, because it tells Russia exactly what Iran will and will not accept, which is precisely the information Russia needs to play its role as the uranium custodianship offer holder in the final phase of any deal. This intelligence also directly informs Russia's positioning at the Beijing summit. When Putin's team briefs Xi's team on the state of the Iran negotiation in the days between Araghchi's Moscow visit and Trump's arrival in Beijing, they are briefing from direct knowledge, not inference. That directness is the difference between Russia and China being prepared for the Beijing summit and Trump being surprised by what Xi knows. Second, Russia gets validation of its uranium offer as a still available mechanism. Every time Araghchi visits Moscow, Russia's uranium custodianship offer is implicitly reconfirmed as active and relevant. Russia has maintained this offer in the face of American rejection, not because Russia expects America to immediately accept it, but because keeping the offer alive preserves Russia's indispensable role in the eventual settlement. The party that holds the solution to the deal's most technically difficult problem, uranium disposal, has a seat at the table that cannot be removed by American pressure or Chinese preference. Araghchi's Moscow visit today is a signal to every party watching that the Russian mechanism remains available and that Iran considers it a live option. Third, and I want to be honest about this, even though it is uncomfortable for some audiences to hear, Russia benefits financially from the continuation of this conflict and has limited financial incentive to rapidly accelerate a settlement. Every day, Brent crude remains above $100 is another $700 million in additional Russian energy revenue beyond the pre-war baseline. Russia has expressed genuine diplomatic support for a negotiated resolution. I do not doubt that sincerity. But Russia's financial position means it can afford to maintain its leverage without urgency in a way that neither Iran nor America can. Araghchi's Moscow visit is calibrated to keep Russia engaged and supportive without giving Russia so much urgency in the resolution that Moscow might push for terms that serve Russian financial interests at the expense of Iranian diplomatic interests. It is a fine balance. Araghchi has been navigating it for 62 days. Let me close with what I believe happens next. And I say this as someone who has watched Iranian foreign policy for decades and who understands the specific diplomatic architecture that is now in motion. Araghchi will complete his Moscow briefing. He will return to Islamabad on Sunday. By Sunday, Oman will have relayed whatever America's initial response to Iran's improved offer is through the private channel that Sultan Haytham is now carrying. Araghchi will bring to the second Islamabad visit the full picture. What America said through Oman, what Russia committed to sustain in Moscow, and what Pakistan needs to know to continue its public mediation role. If America's Oman response has moved toward Iran's terms in any meaningful way, if the gap on the nuclear question has narrowed, if the blockade conditions have been acknowledged as a negotiating factor rather than a baseline, then the second Islamabad visit could produce the beginning of a formal negotiating framework. If America's Oman response has not moved, if the position remains that Iran must dismantle its nuclear program, hand over its enriched uranium to America, and accept the blockade as non-negotiable before any concession, then the Moscow visit becomes the foundation for the next phase. Russia's uranium offer stays alive. China's support for Iran's economy continues. The cost of continued conflict keeps rising, and Trump flies to Beijing having achieved neither a deal nor a military victory. I said at the beginning of this conflict that America's pressure strategy would strengthen the IRGC's internal position rather than weaken it. I said China had built the infrastructure that made Iran's resistance economically sustainable. I said Russia had positioned itself as the indispensable broker of the nuclear disposal problem. 62 days in, all three of those assessments have proven accurate. Araghchi is in Moscow today because the diplomatic sequence requires it. Not because Iran is confused, not because the government is fractured, because this is how you build the conditions for a deal when the other side has more military power than you, but you have geography, allies, and time. Watch what comes out of Moscow. Watch what Araghchi says when he lands back in Islamabad on Sunday. Watch what Russia says publicly about the uranium offer in the week that follows. And watch whether Brent crude drops below $90 before the Beijing summit, because that is the market's way of telling you a deal has been reached through the Oman Channel before anyone publicly admits it. The answer to why Iran is briefing Russia before returning to Pakistan is not complicated. Russia has the uranium solution, Russia has the energy alignment, and Russia has 10 days to brief China before Trump lands in Beijing. Iran is not scrambling, Iran is sequencing, and there is a very large difference between the two.